Hello everybody and welcome to the second part of the beginner's VOPS tutorial. First of all, the link is down in the description to my Gumroad. You can get now every course for the next few days for 30 bucks. And also I want to mention it, I got a Patreon and there are currently, I think, 25 specific individual tutorials on that, so you can check that out too, from shading, look depth, etc. to growth effects, fabric, product shots, geometry build-up, mechanical rigging, and so on and so on. Okay, so let me check the sound. Perfect. What I want to do, I want to continue a little bit on the VOPS. So we left with those simple setups here, with the noise, for example. I think that one was animated, yes. And then we did like a mix, for example. And we also did that line thing here that can move or will move. That one here. And now we can continue a little bit. So what we can do, for example, let's start with a grid here. Whoops, not a group. We'll start with a simple grid here, and I will size it down. So let me just copy parameter, paste relative reference, and make that 1 by 1 in size. And you can also drag the rows and drop them onto the columns, and then relative channel reference. So the channel above will get a referencing, and you can change them both, and the channel with the reference will adapt, of course. Let's go for 15, for example. And what I want to do, I want to place down an add node. And with the add node, we can, for example, delete geometry but keep the points. So now we are left with the points here. Let's visualize them. From 0 to 210, for example. And what we can do now, we can play with those with VOPS. But first of all, what I want to do, only the points here. And now we can drop down, for example, not a VOP. We will continue with that shortly. But I will drop down, let's select that, an attribute, adjust vector. No, not analyze image. Attribute adjust vector, the second one. And now we can get an attribute running here. Let's call that displays, for example. Displays underscore v. And now adjust value, yes, direction and length, that's perfect. Add is also perfect. I want random and I want specific values. Now let's visualize our displays underscore v here. Click on that and make that a vector marker and vector trail. Close, and let's get here a 1. So now we've got a vector pointing down. Oh wait, let's just get that to vector pointing up. So positive 1. And now, for example, what we can do, we can add another specific value here. And now, for example, -1. Adjust with a random, so it's currently adjusting basically on a seed here. So now we can play with a direction. For example, we can now displace the points with the certain values here. So -1 and 1. Of course, you can do that in VOPS too. But I think, for example, when you do it here with the attribute adjust vector, it's much more directive friendly, for example, if you want to create something really specific. Now we can place down our VOP. So let's get just an attribute VOP here, and let's disable that. Let's copy our displays underscore v, dive inside, and let's get that in here. So bind, we'll again import on an attribute, free float vector displays, and let's get a displays along normal. We want the position from our points, and we want the displacement vector will be our displays underscore v, and now we can play. For example, when we just hit the default displacement amount, we will displace them here in the certain amount with the initial direction. Of course, you can randomize that, for example. Another thing what we can do, we've got our displays, we've got our amount, let's get that back to 0. The amount, we can play with that. For now, let's get a parameter. We can, for example, later get a noise in there, etc, etc. Let's call that scale D for displays. Let's copy that in the label. Perfect. Now we've got like an overall multiplier, so we can use that later. And now the scale here. We can drive that, for example, with a bounding box. So let's align that here. I want a bounding box, so bounding box. Relative to bounding box, let's get a bounding box of our geometry here, the position. And now we've got, when we pipe that to the color, let's make them a little bit bigger. You can see we've got basically free vector data here, and we can split it up in individual direction, for example. From the x-axis, the z-axis, and the y-axis. Of course, we got no depth currently here, but we can change that, of course. But now I want to create, like, on the x-axis, I want like a fall off or a ramp to drive our displacement here. What we will do here is to get a vector to float, pipe that in here, and now we can see x, y, z. Let's get a x and pipe that into color, and now you can see we've got now values from 0 to 1, and we can remap them. So ramp parameter, get that in here, spline ramp, this will be our ramp, let's call that fall off, for example. Let's copy that in the label, fall off, pipe that into the scale here, and now we need another multiply, or you can use another multiply, normal multiply, and we will get rid of that here and pipe that into our multiplier. So that is that, and now we of course need we can pipe that, for example, in here. And now you can see we successfully displaced our points with our ramp. So now we can get, for example, an effect like that one here. We can scale it, or we can tweak our ramp here. So we can make that B-spline 0.5, the middle, and now you've created a geometry like that. For example, what you could do, you can now play with the size here. So let's get another one here, another grid. Let's delete the channel here, and now you can play with the size. You can play with the resolution. And you've got here something like that. Another thing what you could do, of course, this is currently complete uniformal. When you displace it, for example, and look from the top, you will still get the grid effect. What you can do, you can remesh the whole thing. So remesher in here, higher resolution, for example 0.025. Let's get a few iterations and a little bit more of smoothing, pipe it in here, voila. You will get something like that. Cool. So uniformal, non-uniformal, of course you can pipe up the resolution here too. Then what we also can do, or what you later can do in rendering, get that ramp, pipe that to the CD, and you, or not pipe it to the CD, you can bind it out, export it, so bind export, let's call it, I don't know, mask for example. And then later in rendering, for example, in Redshift, you can use that as a ramp and remap, for example, your color, your refraction, roughness, etc. Cool. Now that we got that, let's do another one. Let's introduce a little bit of imperfection. What we can use is like the PT_num, so the current point number, pipe that into a random. Let's pipe that to the color out, and the random will export a value between 0 and 1. You can get up, for example, the help menu here, and yeah, you can see each number is in 0 to 1 range, and we can fit that. We can fit that whole thing here. And we can then multiply our amount with that here. And now, of course, it's a little bit chaotic here, but we can raise our destination min to a certain level. And you will get them organized again a little bit. So that's also nice. We can, for example, copy that and get like a preview here. Oh, that's looking cool. Yeah, you can basically play around with that. For example, the valet looks pretty cool to me. And then just for the sake, connect the JSON pieces, you can play around with that. Get different shapes, etc. So one thing that is pretty common, that I think I did a few videos on that. Just pipe that in a connected JSON pieces, get a polywire. Polywire. Let's get a polywire. Let's wire that, but I think, yeah, we need a way smaller wire radius here. Yeah, let's just do it with a resample. Let's resample that to a good amount. Each segment. VDB from particles. Drop that underneath here. Let's go down with the voxel size, and let's also go down with the point radius scale. And now we can adjust that accordingly. 7.5. Yeah, more resolution. Yeah, getting there, getting there. Okay, now again, let's increase our points here. 20 segments, let's go for 30 segments. And then, for example, a smooth SDF. Smooth that shit out a little bit. Convert it back to polygons. And then again, do a massive smooth on that. Smooth or filter quality, you can go, for example, for 1 here. Yeah, that takes a little bit. Let's have a look how many polygons we got. 5 million. Yeah, let's go down a little bit with our resolution. That should be a little bit faster. Yeah. Let's go down one more. And of course then try to find like a nice balance. And then filter quality 1, or you can use attribute blur and blur the position, for example. I don't know, 25. And it's basically like a first thing you could do in Houdini. Yeah. Resample, VDB, and then smooth. And of course, you can now try out different iterations on the VOP here, of course. And then, for example, let's go search radius of 1, and then we can introduce, for example, a little bit of imperfection. So now that's okay. You can like see the form here. But what if we drop that destination min down to 0.5? You will get something like that here. Oh. Yeah, something like that. And you can play with that, of course. Nice. Let's do one other thing. We got a scale. We've got our destination here, so you can play with that, or even with the max slider to bring it up, bring it down, animate it, for example. You can of course animate it. What you can do, you could go for a bend effect after that. Or I think what would be also cool, let's do a quick circle here. Closed, let's go for a higher resolution. Let's place down a polyframe. Let's go on tangent N. Let's make a quick wrangle and reverse the normal at N equals minus at N. So we will reverse the normals here. Let's go for mount node. And now we can basically get a shape like that. Play around with the element size, etc. Or you can use a custom node. Oh yeah, let's just do that. Let's just do it with a VOP here. Why not? Let's get in here, but let's first of all dial up the resolution here. I don't know, let's go 512. Okay, that should be fine. You can go for press W and you will get the wireframe view. Displace along normal, and anti-aliased noise, for example. And you will get something like that. Oh, I know what we could do. We will do another thing. Okay, we've got now that thing here. You can animate it, for example. Let's go down with the roughness a little bit. And now let's do the VOP here. And now you could remesh that. That, and then we can, for example, place that down here. And that one here. And of course, let's add the add to. And you then will get, for example, a geometry like that with the same effect. So you can use the anti-alias noise with the displace along normal, for example, with that setup. So you will basically displace along the normal, and you can create a variety of shapes with that. What you could do is, let's make a copy the points. Let's make a line. Pipe that in here. Then we will need a resample. With the resample, we will resample the line to a given, I don't know, resolution. For example, 0.025. And then we can copy that over here. So we will copy our circles on the line. And now we can loop over each individual circle. Let's make the that a little bit higher. Oh, not direction 2, the length of 2. Yeah, that's better. And now we can also scale that down maybe a little bit. I don't know, 5. I think that should be fine. Pipe that in here. We are now in a for each loop, so we will loop over each circle individual. Pipe that in here. And now we can promote, for example, the offset parameter, or we, okay, there are now several ways to do that, but let's just do it. I think the easiest way would be to go on the second input. What we will do, we will create now the meta import node. So we will create a meta node with, for example, the iteration value, the num iteration, the value, and the I value, etc. Let's call that meta loop. And we will pipe that in here. We will then get our second input and import a detail attribute. And what I want to import is an integer, and it's the iteration. And the iteration is basically the pass iteration on our loop. So for example, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. We can use that iteration to drive, for example, the offset. So pipe that into offset. And now we will get, on each iteration, we will get a different offset on our circles. And we can skin them, for example. That's just like an idea, and we need to reverse them. And now we've got something like that. Looking not too shabby. What we could do is, I don't know, lapse thicken, for example. Let's give it a certain depth, and then VDB that the shit out of that. Oh, okay, that's also a method you could do with VDB from polygons, but let's go with VDB from polygons here. VDB from polygons, of course, way higher here. Let's get a little bit more thickness here. And you could go, yeah, for example, like that. When you disable the smooth, I think you could, yeah, I think you need to thicken up the depth a little bit. So you could do it like with a thicken, or, oh wait, let's go on a minus, negative value here. Yeah, I think that should work a little bit better. Yeah, a little bit better. But, or you can go with the smooth, get a smooth to 10 iterations, and you will end up with something more organic. And now you can, of course, pipe up the length here. So I don't know, 5. Let's go 5. And let's go more crazy on the scale. I don't know, 3 for example. And you then can play with different noises, of course. And you end up with, yeah, something like that here. So the possibilities on like looping stuff is basically endless. Looking pretty cool. Like a, I don't know, environment pillar, etc. And you can play around with that. So I think that's it for that VOPS tutorial. And I hope you liked it. Let's look at the time. Yeah, that's a good tutorial time. And yeah, I hope you will enjoy it. And I will, of course, continue that series. And I will see you in the next one.